you, because if it's on slideshow, I can't see chat. Okay,
Absolutely fine.
If that's okay with you. Okay, I'm Tracy Aquino, as Janet said, and I'm from London's South Bank University, but I'm going to talk to you about studying law in general, and I've got lots of experience over a long time teaching law, and I have colleagues at lots of other universities, so I'll be able to give you an insight into what law might be like if you study through university or if you go on to become a lawyer without going to university. Whichever route you take, though, one of the things about being a lawyer is that it is a challenge. You can't think about being a lawyer as a sort of popularity contest. To be a good and effective lawyer, you're going to have to rise to challenges. Sometimes you're going to have to stand up for things and for people that maybe others don't agree with. But it's really important for individuals whose rights and liberties are under threat and for society in general that we have good, decent, intelligent lawyers who aren't afraid to stand up and be counted. So every university is looking, and every law employer is looking for people who have it in them to stand up for what is right, to rise to the challenge. Now, you might not know that you have that yet, but if you want to be able to develop that ability, that's what we're looking for. Okay, because being a lawyer requires us to stand up for rights and to be prepared to address wrongdoing. And of course, law is so important. It governs all of us all of the time. You can see on the slide a picture of the Houses of Parliament, from where lots of UK law emanates in the form of statutes, Acts of Parliament. But you'll learn that one of the interesting things about law in the United Kingdom is that a lot of law isn't made by Parliament, it's made by judges. We have a lot of law called the common law, which is developed and shaped by judges, made over hundreds of years in cases. And judges tend to take all the glory for the common law of England. But actually, I suppose a bit cheekily, I think they maybe take too much of that glory. Because for every decision a judge makes that people value and respect, there were lawyers putting those arguments before that judge that enabled him to make that decision. And so laws, whether they come from Parliament or whether they come from judges, most of us associate law with rules. But a rule isn't always a law. To be a law, it has to come from a body or a person with law-making powers. And Blackstone, who wrote about law hundreds of years ago, talked about law being a rule commanding what is right and prohibiting what is wrong. And I suppose at a basic level, that's what law does. It tells us you can do this, you can't do that, this must be done, this must not be done. But actually, law is much more sophisticated than just a do this, don't do that. Law is a web of rules that governs society, that supports society, that enables society to flourish. You and I hopefully have rights that other people will respect. If we are the victim of legal wrongs, the law will hopefully protect us. We don't usually have absolute rights. The law is sophisticated. It gives rights, but it also gives responsibilities to behave in an appropriate way. And that very sophisticated, if you like, weaving together of rights and responsibilities, not just at an individual level, but at a corporate level, at a government department level, at public body level, and even between nation states. That very complex interrelationship is what ensures that most of the time, most of us can feel safe and can flourish. It helps have a stability in society. But the law, as you'll learn, isn't cast in stone. The law you will learn when you go to university won't be exactly the same as the law I learned. There'll be some things that have remained the same. But what will have changed is there will have been some subtle changes over the years as case law refined and developed the law. There will sometimes be very dramatic changes where judges say, oh my God, we've had this wrong. For decades, we've been stating the law wrong. We must overrule our own bad decision. And then you'll have circumstances where the law is changed because of acts of parliament. So the law exists, there's an American judge called Mr. Justice Cardozo, for the welfare of society. It's just like at a very basic level when your mum and dad are telling you, do this, don't do that. They're not laying down the rules for the sheer hell of it. They're not laying down the rules to oppress you. They are developing rules, trying to enforce those rules in order to safeguard your welfare, in order to enable you and your siblings and members of your family and friends to basically coexist in the best way possible. So law is designed to promote the welfare of society, both at an individual, organizational, governmental and international level. So you cannot do anything anywhere without the law impacting you. Even in outer space, there is space law. There's the law of the sea. Even our thoughts, intellectual property law. You will have seen recently that there's been a dispute, for example, between Oracle and one of the phone companies, where they have argued that an idea, a computer code, was wrongly used. And so these concepts even are governed by the law. So if the law is so important, if the law is all pervading, it basically means that lawyers, who by definition are people who have legal knowledge and legal skills, are going to be important. Because a lawyer is the person who has to articulate your case in court. A lawyer has to think of ways of enforcing your rights, of challenging current perceptions of the law, to try to change the law for the better. One of the first cases you'll ever learn about is a case called Donohue and Stevenson, a case in Scotland. If any of you are doing A-level law, I imagine you've heard of it. It's about a lady who went with her friend for afternoon tea to a cafe. And the friend ordered and paid for their afternoon tea, which included a bottle of ginger beer for Mrs. Donohue. The ginger beer was made by a manufacturer called Stevenson's. It was in a dark, opaque bottle, so you couldn't see what was inside. The waiter brought it over, and Mrs. Donohue was thoroughly enjoying the ginger beer, when to her horror she poured the last part into her glass, only to find the decomposed remains of a very rotten and not very complete snail. She realised that she'd consumed ginger beer and probably bits of the snail. She said it made her physically ill. She had to go to hospital with gastroenteritis, in effect because she'd been poisoned by the ginger beer. And she also claimed she was horrified and shocked. Now, at the time that happened to her, if you walked into lawyers' offices from the top of Scotland to the bottom of England, lawyers would have told you, Mrs. Donohue, I think you're going to lose. Because the law, or perceived versions of the law, was that people like Mrs. Donohue, who we'd call a consumer nowadays, couldn't sue the manufacturer, even if the manufacturer was outrageously careless, unless they had a contract with the manufacturer. Now, Mrs. Donohue hadn't made any agreement with the manufacturer. You could also sue a manufacturer if they made something that was inherently dangerous, like fireworks that exploded as you carried the box out of the store. But ginger beer wasn't inherently dangerous. And basically, lawyers would have told her, you're going to lose. And just like with horses in a horse race, we know that horses will often lose the race. But sometimes, very wonderfully, you can get a horse win a race that no one would have bet on, that people would have said it's never even going to get to the finishing line, let alone win. And the lawyer who met with Mrs. Donohue not only listened to what she had to say, not only did he say, well, the law looks against you, he said, but I think we should challenge that law. And he brought her case and won at the first hearing, but lost on appeal. But he was so convinced that the law was wrong and should be changed that he, with Mrs. Donohue, took her case to the House of Lords, which was the highest court in the land. And lawyers there argued that Mrs. Donohue should win. And by the barest of majorities, 3-2, the House of Lords agreed. Now, Lord Atkin, who gave the lead judgment for the majority, has been covered in glory ever since Donohue and Stevenson in 1932. Every law student will tell you Lord Atkin's neighbour test, that the rule you must love your neighbour becomes in law you must not harm your neighbour. But actually, if you step behind Lord Atkin, who's one of my heroes, there were lawyers who were prepared to challenge the law. And occasionally, like Don Quixote, you have to tilt at legal windmills. You sometimes won't make any difference, but occasionally, magically, you can. So lawyers are the, if you like, the way in which rights can be vindicated, the way in which wrongs can be addressed. And they are the way in which we can change and articulate the need for change in the law. Lawyers have been responsible for reforming the law, for giving judges the insight and ability to change the law. So if you train to be a lawyer, and I'm using that term quite loosely at the moment, you will be training in an area that is of vital importance to everyone all of the time. It's not a niche area. Nobody's ever going to say to you, well, why do you do law? What use is that? The law is of huge importance and significance. Now, I said to you that I was using the word lawyer in a wide sense, because actually, lawyer is an umbrella term. It's used to describe lots of people who may have legal skills and legal training and who may work within a legal context. And there are lots of different types of lawyer and lots of different ways of becoming a lawyer. And these are changing so much. When I was a law student, there were not these opportunities open. The profession was very narrow. Now there are many different ways to becoming a lawyer and many different types of lawyer that you could be. And you don't need to view the law as a profession that is closed to what I would call ordinary people. All right, I have spent decades teaching students from all walks of life. And whilst it's true that probably at the beginning of my legal career, it was quite hard to break through. The profession is now much more open, much more aware of the need for diversity in terms of social background, in terms of ethnic background. So the doors are there to be opened. And there are lots of different doors that you might choose to open. When I was a law student many years ago, I didn't really have very much experience of the law before going to university. It wasn't something that I had read a great deal about or seen a great deal about. I certainly didn't know any lawyers. I'd seen the odd television program, but that was about it. And when I went to university, I fell in love with the idea of becoming a barrister. The barrister is the lawyer that you often see on the television in the wig and the gown when they are arguing in court. But most barristers do not spend most of their time in court. Barristers are lawyers who practice as an independent individual specialist in a particular area or areas of the law. Barristers work, when they are practicing barristers, in what we call chambers. That's a physical office space, sometimes a virtual office space. And you have staff called clerks who liaise with instructing solicitors, and they will negotiate jobs for the barristers to do called briefs. Now, the brief might ask you to advise a client on a particular legal problem. A brief might ask you to draw up a particular document. A brief might ask you to have a conference with a client, a meeting with a client to talk through their options. A brief might instruct you to negotiate a settlement with the other side, or it might instruct you to appear in court. And so barristers were the traditional advocates. If you qualify as a barrister, you will do quite a lot of advocacy training. That will teach you how to present your arguments in writing in terms of a skeleton argument, but also orally in front of a judge. And barristers don't get paid a salary. If you work a lot and you're very successful, you'll be able to charge a lot for your services. Some barristers are not so well paid. They might choose to specialize in areas where clients maybe are not so wealthy. So a high-level corporate commercial barrister might charge much more for their time than a criminal barrister starting out at the beginning of their career. The barrister's route is a very independent route. You have to be pretty organised. You have to be pretty self-sufficient. You have to be prepared for incredibly busy times and then less busy times. You don't have the predictability in the beginning anyway of a steady income stream. But for people who want to be their own boss, to do things their own way, who like the flexibility and the challenge of independent practice, it's a fantastic career. But you have to work damn hard to be good at it. And if you want to be a barrister, you will have to have a degree. Okay, most people get a law degree, but if you really are, for example, fascinated by history, you could go and study history, but then you would need to do a conversion course after that. And once you've done that, you then have to do further practical training called the bar training course. And that's roughly about a year full time after your degree. And then you will go on and do some hands-on the job learning called pupilage. And in the old days, they used to be very unfairly allocated. It used to be very influenced by who you knew. Now it's an incredibly open and competitive process. You're not guaranteed a pupilage though. And there are some people who do the barrister's training not because they want to practice in independent practice, but because they want to go and work for an organisation as an employed barrister. So there are employed barristers as well as ones in independent practice. But the bar is a relatively small part of the legal profession. There are probably 10, maybe more than 10 times as many solicitors as there are barristers. And solicitors are the lawyers you'll be familiar with on the high street. The lawyers who have offices in little high streets up and down the country, who have big offices in big cities and huge tower blocks of offices in London and capital cities around the world. Now, solicitors deal with clients face to face. They give a lot of legal advice. They do a lot of legal work, like drafting of wills, of contracts. They might deal with acquisitions and mergers. They may deal with complex banking arrangements. And solicitors deal with incredibly multi-million pound multinational arrangements, down to simple things like your nan doing her will in her local high street. They will also have a lot of work, for example, in terms of buying and selling property. Conveyancing is done by solicitors. And solicitors train in traditionally by obtaining a degree and doing a legal practice course after that. But there has been a big shake-up of the way solicitors are going to train moving forward. And so there are going to be lots of new ways of becoming a solicitor. You might go and study law at university, or you might go and do English at university and then another law course. Or you might start studying and working in a kind of legal job and pick up your qualifications as you go. So they may require that you have a degree, but they will not require that it be a law degree. And you will be able to pass what's called the solicitor's qualifying examination, SQE1 and SQE2, without necessarily attending an expensive course. You'll be able to learn yourself, or you'll be able to go on courses for the bits and pieces you need help for, because they are trying to make it easier for people and cheaper for people to qualify as a solicitor. They've also made the work experience much more flexible. So when you guys go to become lawyers, I think it is more open and more flexible now to become a solicitor than was previously the case. But barristers and solicitors will still usually need a degree, although there are some firms that are offering legal apprenticeships. So you work for the firm and you fit your degree studies around your work. So there are lots of avenues opening up to becoming a solicitor. Another type of lawyer, and again, a really good avenue to qualifying, is to be a legal executive. Legal executives work in solicitors' offices, and they tend to work in a particular department. You might be a conveyancing legal exec, or a wills and probate, or a PI legal exec. And you will train and pass exams as you work. So you don't have to do a degree, although you can if you want. And you will start work in the solicitor's office. You'll have on-the-job training, do your first exam, some more training, the next lot of exams, and so on until you qualify as a legal executive. And it's possible for legal executives to go all the way to the top. You can become a partner in a firm of solicitors as a qualified legal executive. So it is still a very clear career structure. It has recognized professional examinations, and it gives you a status as a qualified lawyer, as a legal executive. The next type of lawyer, a paralegal. That's a phrase that we kind of borrowed from America. In America, people who worked in law firms, but who weren't formally qualified by having passed their bar exams, etc., were called paralegals. And they did a lot of legal work. They could be brilliant. They could be earning quite a lot of money. And we now tend to talk also of having paralegals. People who are working in a solicitor's office. Sometimes they might be law graduates who are just temping in the office, doing work to gain experience. Sometimes they may be people starting out as trainee paralegals. It's not as regulated a phrase as legal execs or solicitors or barristers. It's still kind of catching up on the, professional regulation front. But you will sometimes see people talk of paralegals. And the costs lawyers in England, litigation, taking court proceedings, costs lots of money. And the usual rule is that when the parties have finished battling it out in court, the loser not only has to usually pay compensation to the winning party, but the loser will also usually have to pay the losing party's legal costs. And working out what those legal costs are is a very complicated process. So costs lawyers are lawyers who have trained and passed cost lawyers examinations. They don't advise members of the public. They provide a cost service, usually to firms of solicitors. So if I've done a case and I've won the case and I have a costs order in my favour, I would usually send the thick file to a cost lawyer. And that lawyer will go through the file, and they have good knowledge of litigation and the rules of litigation. They have excellent knowledge on costs, and they will work out what can be charged for every letter, every phone call, every hearing, every email, every task undertaken. And they will produce a statement of costs. And if the other side disagree that, then costs lawyers can argue the costs position in front of a costs judge. So it's something that is attractive, especially if you've got a mathematical bent, because it's a niche area, but it's a very interesting area if you're numerate. And a patent attorney is a type of lawyer that often has a science background. Patent lawyers are often people who've done science training, who then decide that they want to do patent exams so that they can become specialist in protecting intellectual property, in designs and inventions and trademarks, etc. Now, all of these types of lawyers have their own routes to qualifying, and these routes are constantly changing. Some of those routes you can only start on if you have a degree, but other routes are open to you straight from school or college. So it's well worth, and I'll put a slide up later, looking at the different rules and the different routes to becoming a lawyer. There's some excellent websites for these professional bodies that give a much better insight and an idea of the time and the expense that this might take. Now, I've said that some types of lawyer need to have studied a degree. And most people who go into the graduate branches of the profession study a law degree. And law degrees are really quite highly regarded. Everyone knows that you have a law degree because it usually says LLB, which marks it out as a Bachelor of Laws. And it tells would-be employers that you have lots of really relevant knowledge. You know so much about something that's so important. But also when you study a law degree, they are very carefully organised to ensure that you get not just good knowledge, but excellent skills. You're going to learn how to research. You're going to learn how to read, extract meaning, articulate your thoughts orally, present argument in court, present argument in writing. And because of that, law tends to be regarded as a gold standard degree. It has currency. Even if you don't want to be a lawyer, studying law is incredibly interesting and very useful in a wide range of careers. I've got 2 children who've done law, not actually practicing as lawyers, no intent to practice as lawyers. So my son did law because he wanted to go into business. He used his law degree to get a place on a graduate training scheme in a large organisation, and then he's moved around the organisation, seeing different aspects of business before settling down, hopefully in an area that interests him. My daughter did law, and she went on to go into the civil service, and she's had some really excellent opportunities in the civil service. It's a really brilliant employer. She's been really well supported in her career in the civil service. She's not working in a law department there. She's worked in Downing Street. She's now working on a lot of equality and gender policies. So she's been able to use the skills she learnt studying law to go into a different kind of career. And one of the beauties about studying law is it keeps all sorts of doors open to you. You don't narrow your choices after university. You keep a very broad choice range for yourself. And that's important, because you don't really know when you start out where you want to end up. And so a degree that preserves maximum choice is a very attractive degree. So when you come to study law at any university, you're going to learn lots about particular areas of law. So you'll acquire legal knowledge in what we view as core subjects. You'll do contract law, criminal law, land law, trusts, EU law, tort, which is an area I teach. So you'll do some core legal subjects. But then you get to add on options, areas of law that interest you. So some students might do family, medical law, company law, international human rights, artificial intelligence law. There's so many different legal options that you can package up into your degree. So you'll get lots of really good legal knowledge. But you'll also get some really good skills. There'll be legal skills, which any would-be lawyer would need to have, but there'll also be what we call intertransferable skills. Employers like law graduates because they know that law graduates are literate, good at communicating, good at prioritizing, good at researching, and these are things that you need in any job. So if you do a law degree, you are setting yourself up not just for a career in law, but if you decide, actually, you know what, I want to go a different way. I feel, for example, my husband's a chartered accountant. When he recruits, is very interested in law graduates rather than accountancy graduates, because he takes the view that they're going to learn accountancy through the Institute of Chartered Accountancy exams. So with a law degree, because law affects so much of accountancy, business, finance, taxation, it gives a law graduate, if you like, an added bonus. So we know that law graduates, are capable of working in all sorts of different fields. Accountancy, banking, retail. You can go into government organisations like the civil service. You could go into the police. There are so many things lawyers can do. Lots of our television personalities did their legal training first. So it's a good degree to get. And in normal times, going to university is a wonderful experience. Even in COVID times, students have managed to make friends, to acquire knowledge, to acquire skills. And we're all very hopeful that things are just going to improve. So if you're thinking you might want to be a lawyer, the most important attribute of a lawyer, and there you can see Baroness Hale, who was the head of the Supreme Court until her recent resignation. I think she would be the first to say that what you need is an open and inquiring mind. You need to be able not just to think that's what the law says, but to think, should it? What's good with that? What's bad? How could that be improved? So to challenge, to question is a heroic virtue. And you need to be able to politely but insistently challenge. You need, and I think this is the same whatever career path you take, you need to be resilient. You are going to be building great careers in times that are going to be constantly changing. And so you also have to be able to constantly change and adapt to deal with the pressures and the uncertainty of work. You have to work hard, and because the law is essentially written down, you have to be prepared to read a lot and to take things on board, to comprehend, and then to use what you've learned and communicate your ideas. And it's that ability to take the law and to realize that it is not cast in stone, but that it is capable of fluidity and change. It's that harnessing of the, if you like, ever-changing nature of the law that is the lawyer's greatest skill. Now, I said to you that there were lots of different lawyers that you could become. And the websites of all of these organizations have some excellent material on how to become a barrister, a solicitor, a cost lawyer. And these organizations have not just, very basic information, they've gone to great lengths to try to explain the career paths, the kind of jobs you might do, the challenges you might face, and the help that there is. So I highly recommend that you make a note of these links, and I'm quite happy to send the slides to Janet afterwards if she'd like them. So, but I think if she's recorded it, you'll be able to see these links. Okay, so I highly recommend that you look at those. I also think that you might want to find out more about the law. Any kind of film that you can watch with a legal context is great. You have to bear in mind that there might be a little bit of dramatic license and that the system in the USA is different to here, but there's still some excellent legal films out there. So the classic is 12 Angry Men, the Henry Fonda movie where he's a member of a jury and the deliberations of the jury are filmed, and it's a very intense movie showing how group dynamics, how, if you like, people can change the way others think. It's a really excellent movie, and the recent events in the USA made me think about 12 Angry Men when the jury were deliberating recently in the most recent Minneapolis case with the Derek Chauvin and the terribly tragic death that the jury found him guilty of. Legally Blonde, a frivolous movie, but some serious law and legal principles at its heart. To Kill a Mockingbird, again, a great movie about the need for justice and the need to provide justice to individuals who are not popular, individuals who are disadvantaged, individuals who are being dealt a very bad hand. In the Name of the Father is about English miscarriages of justice centred around the Irish Troubles. There is lots of good TV series. Judge John Deed, you might be able to pick that up. It's a slightly old one, but it's a dramatic series involving a slightly maverick judge. The Highest Court in the Land is a factual account of the Supreme Court. Silk is about a series of stories set in barristers' chambers, and there's the background of the legal cases, there's the politics, there's the relationships. The Split also does the same in the context of family solicitors. In the US, there's The Good Wife, which is a legal stroke political series. And many of you, I'm sure, have watched The People and O.J. Simpson. Books, there's The Secret Barrister, which is an inside story on what it's like to be a junior barrister in our slightly crumbling system. The Rights of Man by H.G. Wells was written after the war and basically helped inform on the need for a declaration on human rights. Eve was framed by Helena Kennedy, how women have often been treated badly by the law. QB7 by Leon Uris is about a defamation case where a doctor sued someone who alleged that the doctor had taken part in Nazi death camp experiments in the Holocaust. Bleak House by Charles Dickens, excellent book, also a great TV series. And I'm sure many of you have read about John Grisham's books. So anything and everything you can devour, because if you gain in an insight to the law, you will be better informed about whether that's a direction that you might want to go in. It will also make your learning journey once you get to university far easier. I think it is important to try to find out as much as you can, but the reality is that very few organisations offer work experience to people before they've gone to university. If you get the chance, grab it. But the reality is at university, we don't expect students to have had work experience. A good university course, though, will offer you lots of opportunity to gain hands-on experience. So my university and a number of others have their own law clinic that students volunteer and work in. We have a student-led process called Street Law, where we go to organisations and schools and colleges and basically educate people on their legal rights and how the law impacts on them. Our students staff county court help desks. We get involved in lots of pro bono organisations. So you need to look for a university that not only gives you good classroom experience, but lots of hands-on experience to gain in your confidence and your understanding of the law and how it operates. Okay, over to you guys. Do you have any questions? I think you can ask. I think Janet.
Yeah, feel free if you have any questions to put it in the chat box or to raise your hand. But to be honest, Tracy, you covered pretty much everything. It was so comprehensive.
It's always difficult to know. Okay, the entry requirements for law.
You see it. Go on.
Okay, I can see it now.
Brilliant.
Now I've stopped having to look at the slides. I can see it. Okay, the entry requirements for law vary from university to university. All of them should have on their website or on their UCAS page what their requirement is. The requirements tend to be in terms of UCAS points. They don't tend to be very subject specific. Okay, so it's not like medicine where they insist you've got chemistry and this and that and the other. With law, you are looking for students who have demonstrated the right kind of intellectual abilities. Now, some universities will require you to have all A's, others may have lower entry requirements. Don't think that necessarily the higher the entry requirement, the better the university, or the lower the entry requirement, the worse. Different universities have different missions and ethos. So some modern universities are much more geared to diversity and giving opportunity, for example. So you need to check what your realistic A-level or access course outcomes might be. And then you need to look at a number of different universities. If it were me, I would look at universities that were at my predicted level, maybe some that are a little bit higher to give me something to aim for. And I'd also look at some that might be lower in terms of entry requirements, but which maybe have positives. You know, they may have high student satisfaction. They might have good employability. They might have an interesting course. They might be in a great location, for example. So there are lots of things that you should look at. But some universities will also require you to sit an examination called the LNAT. And it's a sort of aptitude test. And it varies. Some universities were in the scheme and dropped out because they didn't like the results it produced. Others have remained in the scheme. And if you apply for an LNAT university, you could get straight A stars at A level. But if you haven't done or passed the LNAT, they won't give you a place. So make sure you check very carefully if the university you're thinking of requires you to do an LNAT. Because an LNAT is an aptitude test that some people rave over, others are not so sure. And it's one of these sort of bizarre things which, you know, I know it says there is a wall. There is graffiti on the wall in green. There are 3 cats. One cat has a yellow paintbrush, one has a blue paintbrush, one has a red paintbrush. Which of the following options is most accurate? And you have to decide, did the 2 cats combine together to do the graffiti, or did none of the cats do the graffiti? It's one of those weird aptitude tests that sometimes you can either grasp very quickly or you can struggle with. And my own experience is that although the LNAT is supposed to, if you like, be a constant standard, I know students who've had very different marks on it between their first and second attempt. And I know, for example, Cambridge used to use it, but then stopped using it because they didn't like what it threw up. So
we're going to have to wrap it up now.
Yeah. Just one thing, when
Yep.
it says, does it matter what university you go to when studying law? Obviously, different universities have reputations for strength in different areas. And the most important advice is to go to the university that you feel you will be happiest at, because sometimes students are swayed by what they think is a perception of a university. Oh, that's a really good uni. And then you get there and you're miserable. And if you drop out, then it was not a good choice. If you went to a different university that suited your skill set, your personality, and you are going to emerge with a really good degree, that's what matters. And you can get scholarships whatever university you went to. I've got students who've got major scholarships with the Inns of Court, £25,000 scholarships, coming from South Bank University with access course backgrounds, had not done very well at school at all. But if you take your opportunities and you make the most of them, then you can do well. And with networking, lots of universities will try to introduce you, I know we do, to local professionals. We bring people in, we bring speakers in to give you the chance to meet and network. And some universities, not all, but I know we do, we have a working in the law module, which gives students a placement. So you do get some work experience.
Right.
Okay.